Hey everybody, Matty Ice here, and in today's video we're going to be covering 3 different Void Warlock builds and kind of discussing the ins and outs, do's and don'ts for creating a build yourself, and why I think the Nezarec build is probably the best option for you, with Contras coming up in a second. Now the background gameplay you're witnessing here is my run through with Nezeracs, and I do want to say that the build I'm going to propose is going to be slightly different than what I ran here, simply because I had to adjust for the different champion options. So I will cover that when I discuss the actual mods and everything. So with that being said, let's get into it. So I ran this through the current day's Lost Sector, which happened to be one of the ones on the moon, and I just want to say that having done this on Master for all 3, I definitely prefer Contras or Nezeracs. The main deciding factor is going to be whether you want to use a Void weapon or not. So in this particular Lost Sector, there were not a whole lot of shields to worry about. There was one solar shield in the boss room, and I believe there were a couple void shields that I had to worry about. So this actually worked out pretty nicely in that I didn't have to run any special type of weapon or anything like that other than the champion weapons themselves. So the reason I prefer Contras, the advantages there, are you don't have to worry about running a void weapon or any specific energy, and it's very specifically designed for an ability spam, which works at all stages. This works at entry level content, regular old playlist activities. It works in higher end content, especially with Void now having weaken, and the fact that Divinity is going to be nerfed to provide the same weaken as Void. It's going to be much more viable and actually most likely required going forward, since I foresee the gameplay mechanics going forward being, instead of having a person on Div, you just have one person on Void, most likely a Void Hunter, since they can use Tether, and that provides a better debuff while still maintaining your ability to do damage. But the same can also be said for Void with Child of the Old Gods. So there's definitely going to be that kind of alternate requirement from going to Divinity to avoid a person, but that's off topic here. So getting back on topic, the reason I prefer Contras, again, it just kind of feeds into that ability spam, and it doesn't require the weapon. The other 2 exotics I'm going to be talking about, Nezarec Sin and Mantle of Battle Harmony, do require a same element weapon, so in this case it's going to be Void, to actually activate their abilities. So that's one of the downsides that they have, is you're locked into an element type, and if you're doing a Grandmaster or a Master or anything like that with match game, and there aren't void shields, then it kind of defeats the point of running those exotics, because if you're running a void weapon, it just doesn't really help you at all. Now if you've been watching the background gameplay here, you'll see that every time I get a void bow kill, the exotic perk Abyssal Extractors activates. Alongside my Devour perk, this allows me to keep all of my abilities up pretty consistently, which is one of the reasons this is so great. I also run bombers to make sure I can get my grenade back even faster if I need to, and I've got elemental wells as well. Essentially what this means is that I'm able to get my abilities, particularly my grenade, back very quickly, and the elemental wells and the Abyssal Extractors perks help get my other abilities active. So the main focus on this build is your grenade, so it's going to be resilience and discipline is what you're speccing into, and again we'll cover that in more detail as we get further in. But you can see that the abilities have a pretty good uptime, and my super generation is actually pretty consistent as well. So now I'm actually going to switch the background gameplay over to my Mantle of Battle Harmony, and you'll kind of be able to compare the difference and see the recharge rate difference. What I want you to keep an eye on is the exotic perk activating on the left hand side of the screen. So with Mantle of Battle Harmony, you're supposed to get extra super energy when you get a void kill, and if your super energy is full, you get a damage boost. Now what ends up happening, as I'm watching this back here, I'm actually getting the damage boost alongside the super energy buff, so I'm able to get both of the effects of this throughout the entire run here. So what all this essentially means for you is if you're running something where you know you're going to be able to get a bunch of kills with your void weapons, you'll be able to get your super back even faster and also generate extra damage. But for a boss fight such as Rulk or to some degree Atheon or even Oryx, this is not going to be any kind of viable strat for you because the extra damage you get does not last very long and there aren't a whole lot of ads to kill during those boss phases. So this is definitely a exotic that you want to run for primarily ad clear and slightly extra damage against champions. So if you do decide to run this, just keep that in mind that this primarily focuses on getting those kills and keeping those kills consistently active. So if you're fighting in a Grandmaster or Master Strike, Raid, whatever you have, just keep that in mind that this is all about getting the ad clears done and keeping those kills consistent. Now, you can see here that the super I actually got around the same time as I did with my Nezeracs, so there did not seem to be any significant change there. So again, that's why I recommend Nezeracs over Mantle, because Nezerac gives you an all-around ability boost, whereas Mantle only gives you a little bit of extra damage and your super energy boosted, but to me the super energy boost is not significant enough to make up for the lack of ability boost. So again, that's why I would recommend doing the ability boost with Nezeracs, and since both of these require void weapons to be active and keep their abilities up, there's no real sacrifice being made other than the fact that you're having your exotic piece on your helmet rather than your chest. With that being said, I have now switched over to the Contraverse Holds build, and you're going to show that in the background gameplay here. This is one where I've kind of got a toss-up for me. I really like Contraverse Holds, but I recognize that it does have its downsides. So it's a bit of a toss-up and more situational for which one I prefer to use. But Contraverse Hold is very specific about what it's designed to do. You are meant to charge your grenade, throw it, get some kills, or just do a lot of damage with it, and just recharge your grenade as quickly as possible so you can throw another one. So with Contraverse, I definitely prefer to use void grenades, and I found that throughout this lost sector in particular, I was able to clear things faster, and I was able to have my grenade up pretty much the entire time. So to me, in this particular situation, I think it's better. Now, I can see a lot of debate going on, and I definitely have debate with some of my friends about which one is better in general. And in general, I would say it depends. I mean, again, Nezerac forces you into a void weapon to get its effects, whereas Contraverse does not. So Contraverse, though, again, requires kills or significant damage to keep that uptime. The kills really just generate the void wells, which help you get all your other abilities back faster, whereas Nezerac's, any weapon kill with a void weapon gets your abilities back faster. So again, it's all about just requirements and what you're particularly running, but I think Contraverse Holds has a little more leeway and flexibility. So you can see in the amount of time here, I got to this section in under 2 minutes and I'm just flying through, whereas in the others it took me much longer to get to this point. So finally, before we get into the actual loadouts and the mods and all that, I do want to just discuss briefly about how these builds actually come together. So if you're new to building, creating builds yourself, the way that I come up with these ideas on what to use and how they interact, I use several different sources. A lot of it is just gameplay experience. So for example, knowing with Contraverse Holds the ability to regenerate your grenade with grenade damage, it's all about getting your grenade back. So in order to maximize that, you throw in things such as Bomber, so that when you use your class item, you get more grenade energy. If you're in a situation where you're not running champion mods, you can use Stasis Arms to get grenade kickstart, but if you are in a situation where you need champion mods, just know that's not an option. But since I'm going to be throwing my grenade, I'm going to be using a solar helmet, so I can use Ashes to assets, so I can get more super energy with those grenade kills. So I'm just centering everything around 1 or 2 points, and then trying to round out the rest of the build off of that. So the Void Elemental Wells are there to get my class ability and melee ability back faster, not necessarily my grenade. It's there to supplement the grenade, but that's not the focus of the wells. The wells are to round out the rest of the build. So whenever you're thinking about making a build, try to focus on 1 or 2 key aspects of it, and then try to round it out with the mods. So that's kind of the way I approach it. Hopefully that made sense. If not, I'm more than happy to discuss it in the Discord channel. There's going to be a link to that in the description, along with all of the dim links for these builds. So with that being said, I'm going to now cut over into the actual loadouts and weapons to use here. So I'm going to now cover the exotic pieces in kind of reverse order. So we're going to start with Mantle of Battle Harmony. So if you're not aware of how Mantle works, again, I kind of alluded to it in the video itself, but takedowns or kills with weapons that have a damage type matching your subclass give you super energy. When your super energy is full, you gain bonus damage instead of the super energy. Now, as it seemed to show in that gameplay, you do get the bonus damage in addition to the absorption shells for super energy. So it's kind of interesting how that phrasing is there. Alright, but as far as the mods go, on Helmet, I am going to be running Ashes to Asset with a Harmonic Siphon and Elemental Ordnance. Ashes to Asset strictly for super energy generation in addition to the absorption shells. Harmonic Siphon, again, that's kind of a no-brainer since I'm going to be running a void weapon anyway and I'm going to be on a void subclass. I might as well get some extra orbs of power for myself and my team. And then Elemental Ordnance is there to help round out the build and get ability generation back. Now for gloves, if you're not running any kind of champion mods, then I would say put a grenade kickstart in there. But if you are running elemental mods like this, then there's obviously no space for that. If you're only running one champion mod, then maybe consider swapping in like a seasonal armor mod, or making this some other thing like void or solar so you can get impact induction or something along those lines in there. Otherwise, you're just having an elemental ordnance on here. You could consider switching this to something like Font of Might for extra damage, but for the most part, I think the elemental wells are going to serve you better. You pretty much already saw on the chest piece earlier, but I'm going to be running just double thermoshocks for the seasonal 2 resistances there, in addition to seeking wells. Again, I think with any kind of well generation focus like this, you want seeking wells because it's just so much easier than trying to run around and pick them up. For the boots, I've got them solar for bountiful wells, in addition to recuperation and innervation. You again could swap this around for an absolution. You could swap it around for any kind of scavenger mod, something like that. But that's just kind of what I have going on at the moment. And then finally with the bond, as I mentioned before, I'm running double bomber with another elemental ordnance. So again, it's a solar class item. So what all this ends up being, as you saw from the video, is a lot of ability spam with some super generation, but to me it's not as good as with Nezeracs. So that's just my thoughts there. Going into the subclass, this is going to be the exact same that you're going to be running for Nezeracs, so I'm only going to cover this once here. Cataclysm or Vortex, those are kind of your choices. You've got Slova Bomb. It does better single target damage in the sense it seeks to your target, so you're more likely to get a hit, and all of the seekers outside of it will then hit the target. But if it's going into a group, you might have them go to different ones. So again, it's kind of how you want to use it in preference. I kind of bounce back and forth between which I prefer, but those are really 2 options. Nova Warp, I can't recommend that in PvE content. These are pretty much all kind of preference, with Pocket Singularity being really your only option. I do Burst Glide and Healing Rift, and then Vortex Grenade. So Grenade on this particular build is preference. Vortex does have a longer time with 201 seconds. Sorry, not 201 seconds, 2 minutes 1 second, whereas you could try to get something lower, such as the Void Spike or Void Wall, but I prefer Vortex. It's just all around better in my opinion. You're also going to go with Child of the Old Gods and Feed the Void. Since you're not going to be charging your grenade, you don't need Chaos Accelerant. And then for fragments, I go with Undermining, Remnants, and Persistence, with Expulsion being your flex slot. So since this is a super generation focused build, this one gives you extra intellect, and also the void targets exploding is just great. It's hard to beat that. There are some other options you could put in there, such as Echo of Reprisal. When you're surrounded by combatants, you get extra super energy. This is very good for just general super generation. You could also run Echo of Obscurity if you want the extra recovery and the potential to go invisible. And then finally there's Echo of Instability. This is going to give you those volatile rounds when you get grenade kills, which you should be doing a lot of. So those are kind of my other options for you instead of Expulsion. And that's going to hold true across all of the different builds that I have for you today, with the exception of Contraverse Holds. Okay, so moving on to the next build here. Nothing really has changed. We're using still a Void Weapon to do this here, in addition to the exact same fragments, aspects, abilities, all that. Again, you could swap out Expulsion if you wanted to. So Nezerac, similar to Mantle of Battle Harmony, says void damage kills increase ability recharge rate. So again, it's very similar. It's just this gives you the ability recharge rate rather than specifically just super energy and the potential for extra damage. So on the helmet, I've got Ashes to Assets, Harmonic Siphon, and Bountiful Wells, with the main difference there being that I had a Bountiful Wells somewhere else rather than on the helmet. The arms, again, you could make these stasis if you wanted to, but since I was planning on running this Lost Sector, I knew that I needed something different, and I wanted to showcase those other options to you. So if you want to make them an element such as Void, you could do Bolstering Detonation, which just gives you your class ability back when you do damage with the grenade. So since we're going to be throwing a ton of grenades, this is a great fit. But again, if you need to run something like an Anti-Barrier Scout and Overload Bow, it really doesn't make a difference since both those slots are filled up. The only time you could kind of tinker around with this is if you had an extra slot here that you could slot one of these armor mods to for the champions. But if you don't have the armor for that, then you have to do this kind of setup. For the chest, it's exactly the same as before. Seeking Wells with double Thermoshocks. For the boots, it's essentially the same thing. The only difference here is that I went Void with Reaping Wellmaker, Absolution, and Better Already, which is essentially the same thing. You get your health back, you get your cooldowns back when you pick up orbs, and Reaping Wellmaker here instead of another Elemental Ordnance. But this was just something I was testing out. You could do an Elemental Ordnance there as well. The main reason I went with Reaping here is since I'm going to be getting all of my abilities back faster, I know I'm going to be spamming my Rift, which also gives me Child of the Old Gods, so I'm planning on using my Rift more. So that's why I went Reaping in this instance. And also with Bountiful Wells here, this is going to give me 2 Void Wells as opposed to 1. So I might be losing 1 Void Well from my grenade kills, but I'm going to be gaining 2 from getting a kill after using my Rift, which should be happening quite frequently. And then finally, we have Double Bomber and Elemental Ordnance on the Bond. So that's my setup for Nezerac. And again, this works very well, and in my opinion is better than Mantle of Battle Harmony. So finally, let's go over to Contraverse Holds. Okay, so for Contraverse Holds, as I mentioned before, the focus is going to be on getting your grenades out. So everything here is going to be grenade focused. The helmet is going to look exactly the same. Just in this instance, I've got a grenade mod instead of a resilience mod, just because that's the way that my stats worked out here. I am prioritizing resilience and discipline since I'm focusing on my Devourer to regen health rather than recovery. On the arms, I have them as stasis, but again, as I've mentioned before, if you have double champions in here, it doesn't matter. This is only if you don't have any champion mods. If you have one champion mod, then, as I mentioned before, make it a different element, so you can kind of take advantage of that lost energy. The chest, again, I do double thermoshocks with Seeking Wells. In this instance, I have Artifice Armor slotted in, so I'm able to get double thermoshocks and a concussive dampener since I had one extra energy left over. This is just something you can do if you have Artifice available for you. For the legs, again, I kept them the exact same with Better Already, Absolution, and Elemental Ordnance. And then finally, the Bond, again, exactly the same. Double Bomber, Bountiful Wells. Now going into the aspects and fragments, they're all going to look pretty similar. Going with the Vortex Bomb or the Slova Bomb, Vortex Grenade. The main difference comes in the form of your aspects, so you're essentially swapping out Child of the Old Gods for Chaos Accelerant because you need the ability to charge a grenade for Contraverse Holds to get the best effect out of it. We're keeping Feed the Void because we need Devour. And then on fragments, we're losing our flex slot here, and we're keeping persistence for the increased devour time. We're keeping Echo of Undermining for the void weakening targets, and we're keeping remnants to keep our vortex grenade lasting longer. So really that's all there is to it. It's pretty straightforward stuff. It's all about just using the exotic to its fullest effect. There are some exotics that I'm not including in here, such as Nothing Manticles, because in my opinion Scatter Grenade is just kind of useless in PvE content at the moment. Obvious things such as Karnsteins you could make work with a glaive, but I don't prefer that. If you're going to be running Void, I would prefer something better than Karnsteins or Necrotic Grips. And then Fellwinter's and Winter's Guile, Claws of Ahamkara, those aren't Void specific ones. Those are more generic. So I'm not really including them in my analysis here. So I'm focusing on just these Void specific ones. As far as Void helmets go, you've got the Skull of Ahamkara. In my opinion, that's just not good enough to warrant using. You get increased super energy back, so you would think it'd kind of be on par with Mantle of Battle Harmony, but in the end, you really just don't get enough back to make it worthwhile. You're able to get up to 50% back, similar to Phoenix Protocol and all that, but it's really just, it has no use outside of that, so it's not worth using in my opinion. Chest pieces, there aren't really any good Void specific chest pieces. The closest one you can get is Chromatic Fire, but in my opinion that's just not very good. And then for boots, again, there's not really a whole lot of good Void specific boots other than Secant Filaments, which give you an empowering, your Empowering Rift gives you Devour immediately. So you could essentially run any of these with your Charge Grenade instead of the aspect that gives you Devour. But I prefer to not run those unless I specifically need them for the overload capabilities, just because I don't, again, see the benefit of running the Empowering Rift. Like, yes, you get the extra damage, but I prefer to have a Healing Rift for the situations where my Devour is not up, or I'm not able to get a kill and I need health back immediately. So, those are just my thoughts here on all the things Void. Let me know what you think in the comments below. As always, I would greatly appreciate it if you could like and subscribe. Also, feel free to join the Discord. I'm doing a lot of activity there, and that's the best way I can help you out if you need any assistance with your build, or if you need Grandmaster assistance or anything like that. I also pull any open slots for raids from there, and do a lot of things off stream with the community on Discord. So feel free to join if you want to be a part of that. So with that being said, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.